Hey everybody, Justin here to give you guys a summary and review of the Call of the Plaguebearer custom campaign. I've done this once before on the channel for Dark Matter. When I like to not try to review or give my thoughts on a scenario until I have at least 2 plays of it under my belt. I've recently finished up a Call of the Plaguebearer run on my Patreon page, and yeah, so I'm ready to give my thoughts on another custom scenario here. Likewise, last time I'm going to start with my thoughts on just like the scenario, the campaign as a whole, and then we're going to break it down scenario by scenario and dig in a little bit deeper. The summary is going to be spoiler-free, a general recommendation for those who do not want to be spoiled by specifics. I might have some general statements, but I'm not going to be talking about any sort of spoilers that exist in here. And then when I break it down scenario by scenario, we're going to actually start worrying about spoilers and get into details. I do have it broken down already. If you go down to the video, the watch time, the little play bar, you'll see that there is the broken down between beginning, spoiler-free, and when we get into the individual stuff. So, Call of the Plaguebearer is a really good custom campaign. I enjoy a lot that happens here in Call of the Plaguebearer. The mood of this campaign is really cool. There's something that happens quite often, actually conveniently, on the second scenario, the fourth scenario, the sixth scenario, and the eighth scenario. You play all of these in ARKHAM, specifically on that map, which is really cool, and the map revisits, and each moment before has some lasting effects that carry over into the next one, which is, I think, probably one of the biggest successes of this campaign, is how it feels a lot more like you're home in ARKHAM and you're heavily affected by it. And it's cool, and it adds a good amount of replayability to the campaign, where the fact that the things that happen in this scenario will shape the way that you have to approach these next scenarios as well, which is ultimately just what makes the replayability really nice. So, as you can see, there's zombies and stuff. So the general theme of this, if I had to put it into one word, zombies isn't that word. You could, yes, describe it as zombies, but there's an infection of sorts due to a certain ancient one that as the whole thing comes. So there is something bad happening, a miasmic plague, if you will, that is causing some chaos, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly why it's happening. It could be because of some decisions by a certain underground facility. It could be some decisions by a certain scientist. It could be some decisions by a certain ancient one poking his naughty nose into things, right? But it's kind of just, that's kind of the whole story that's on here. And you're figuring out what's happening and how you can stop it in a classic ARKHAM horror style. The mood is still with on the other campaign I did, this Dark Matter, which is another fantastic custom campaign. With Dark Matter, a big thing that happens in that one is that it's in space. So, it's in the future. So it does feel notably disconnected from what ARKHAM is. While it still plays and feels like ARKHAM, it's not what I imagine the majority of people, if they think ARKHAM files, what they get, like the 1920s. This one, while yes, taking place within the 1920s, it does also kind of have a similar sort of disconnect. It does feel a lot more themed appropriate for ARKHAM files. Not that I'm saying that because Dark Matter is in the future, it's bad. Dark Matter is really good, even if it's a little bit of futuristic dissonance, right? It still works really well and it explains itself really well. This one is a bit more grounded, but it still has some aspects that feel a bit more modern than they do. And once again, this is not me saying this is a knock. The campaign I'm building is entirely modern. I feel like the best thing about ARKHAM is that the format allows for the designers, at least in these custom scenarios, to explore many different things. And I'm very happy that the designer of Call of the Plaguebearer did that. It's the fact that it feels still 1920s, but it also feels a little bit like 1970s, 2000s, 2020s. Like, it kind of can fit into multiple places while letting yourself really just like immerse yourself in the story. I think the story on this one is really cool, really nice, and I like seeing how it shapes up. There's some cool twists in some scenarios that you weren't expecting to see come, which I think is really nice. And I think one of the biggest things is with this one is that expect that there is a lot of exploratory design that the designer was searching for with this scenario, with this campaign, where it's a lot of the times they seem to be posing the question like, what if I did this? So like there's some moments, specifically when we get into these last scenarios here, that are a little bit harder to understand immediately how they work, but it's because the designer is trying to really twist things to see what they can do in this system. And like ultimately it does work. I will say my first playthrough of notably this scenario had a lot of questions that I didn't really know the answers to. But then when you get there the second time, it ultimately works. And that's like one of those things. So just be aware of that this one is, while Dark Matter, the previous custom campaign I gave my thoughts on, was very much like a puzzle game. This one is a lot less puzzle. It's much more ARKHAM, but it is a lot more exploratory in what the rules and what all the different zones in ARKHAM that one can explore is. So I think that Call of the Plaguebearer is a really fun custom campaign. It, of course, like Dark Matter, has some of those moments where you can feel like you're playing a campaign that's not designed by a team, right? Or had playtesting by like a big group of people. But overall, I think that's just the reality of a custom campaign. So like, while I definitely think that this campaign is better than something like Dunwich Legacy at this point in my career, my ARKHAM playing career. Likewise, I'd even rather play this over The Circle Undone again. But at the same point, it feels a little bit more like a custom campaign. That's just the reality of these situations. So like you're not getting like a Edge of the Earth level experience, or like Dream Eaters or a Carcosa level experience in terms of like, it's hard to explain, but like when you've played a lot of custom campaigns, you kind of just know it. So that's just kind of like what I'm trying to get across here, is that there are going to be moments that you're going to feel like you're playing something that you're like, this is a little bit custom campaigny, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing is what I'm trying to say. You just have to like take it in. You got to take it bones and all, right? This is called the Plaguebearer, and it's really good, and its highs are highs, and it's a great experience, and there are some absolute bangers of scenarios that exist in here. I really like it, and I highly suggest that you play it if you have not played it already. And let's get into the spoiler thoughts here. We're going to break it down scenario by scenario, and I'm going to give some generic thoughts about those. Okay, Late Risers. This right here is the opening scenario of the campaign. You wake up in a facility, in a morgue, and you don't know what you're doing here. You see right away that the location next to you has barricades. And you cannot enter locations with barricades on them, but as an action you can spend up to 2 clues from investigators of your location, remove that many barricades from an adjacent location. I think right off the bat, what I want to get across right away is that this intro block here is some really fantastic design. It works so well at getting the point, like at getting the players. It's like it tutorializes it very well. One thing that I think Dark Matter does also really well is its first scenario. However, that one kind of puts a little bit more urgency on the players. It puts immediate fear in their minds, which, while yes, is very good, this works really well, this opening scenario. It does really good job at telling the players what they need to do while teaching them the mechanic of the scenario, which is ginormous, right? It's one of the toughest parts of ARKHAM is when you're playing with someone and they're playing something for the first time and they don't know what they need to do. And this immediately sums it up. Get clues from this location, use those clues to remove barricades so we can enter Lab Omega. When you enter Lab Omega, things go nuts. So some of the things that are happen is the rest of the map comes into play, which are like a bunch of lab locations. And then the whole thing comes out and then players can start exploring. So they realize they're in this horrible facility and that something is just not right here, which is, it's a really good opening, like punch in the face for the storytelling, because you're like, where am I? What's going on? And this is the thing I was talking about, how where this feels very it can feel very 1920s, but it can also feel very modern, very Resident Evil. And I think that's really cool, and I love the mood of this first scenario. Likewise, there's a bunch of locations that still have barricades on them, and we're going to get to something here that I think is a really interesting addition to this campaign, and I think it's something that also works really well here. So we have the as you can see, the cultist token, the -3. If you succeed, you may remove a barricade from an adjacent location. We see that as well on the expert side, -6, so a lot bigger. But this is something that's going to carry throughout this entire campaign, where the cultist token is a really big modifier compared to everything else. Not so big here because the effect is very minor, but the cultist in all the campaigns has a big modifier and has a positive effect on it if you succeed, which is really cool. I really like this aspect of the design, and I think this was a very smart decision from the designer, whose name I want to get. I think it's... I don't want to even say what my gut is, because I have to just... Yeah, okay, my gut said Jack Science. That's what my gut... That was the Dr. Jack Science. That's their username that I've talked to before, but Walker Graves was the designer here. They did a fantastic job, and I think this was one of their coolest additions on this here, was this negative token that has such a big modifier, but has a positive effect when it's drawn. So as they grab the facility, they're going to keep exploring. There are these horrible creatures that come here. Going through the encounter deck, there's these thralls, which act as kind of like the acolytes for this campaign. Aloof patrol nearest miasma location. The players are going to learn pretty quickly on, and I think very successfully, that miasma locations are bad, bad, not good. And it really covers those. Well. Then also as well, there's going to cover out these panicked agents. So as they're in the agency, this is where these things happen. These enemies are, the whole agency set, they're tough, man. These agency, they always are like, they're good, strong enemies, and it's just very like tough when they show up. They can really like show up at a bad time and really put you in a bad place, which is really like, all the enemies I think are just nice and well designed for this. Albeit I've never played this campaign with like A+ tier investigators. I mean, I played it with Finn, he's good, but like Leo was my fighter, and my second time through Rita was my fighter. So it's one of those things that like, these things would probably be less scary if I had like a Mark Harrigan or a Nathaniel Cho, right? But they're still just, I think, really nice enemy designs. I love these guys. The Aloof makes them just an absolute nightmare, and if you can get free kills on them, it really shows. One thing that I really like that Dr. Jack Science did with this is that, just gotta make sure Dr. Jack Science, because I'd hate to say the username wrong, is that they reuse other cards. I believe also Idle Hands is another one that exist in the core game, like the actual game, the official game, but with different art to fit into the flavor of the campaign, which is really cool. This does a fantastic thing because number one, easier to design because there's all that stuff is settled. But what it also does is it allows a better balanced Mythos deck because the Mythos deck from the core games are already very well balanced. And like this, if there's, going back to my point that I said earlier about how custom campaigns feel like custom campaigns, a lot of the time custom campaigns feel like custom campaigns because of the Mythos deck. This campaign does a good job of avoiding that to a big extent because their Mythos decks are so much more tight and refined. See, there's also this Rotting Remains here. For each point you fail by, take 1 horror. And then this card, this Suppressing Fire, is an absolute beast. And it's kind of like the Grasping Hands kind of idea. But man, is it going to throw you... I think what's really good about this whole campaign as a whole is that the Mythos decks do a very good job of throwing you haymakers while feeling entirely fair for the most part. There is, I'm going to be touching on some things later on, but I think that especially for these first scenarios, the Mythos decks are really well balanced. Also in this scenario, you get introduced to some important players. Agent Grayson. You can find this thing that is the Suspicious Briefcase, which you can open. You can try to force it open early, or you can carry it with you the whole campaign. This was my hunch, and also confirmed that this is a reference to the gnome in Left 4 Dead. And it was. And it's kind of like one of those things where it's like a little side quest you can do that makes things more challenging, but you get a nice little boost for it because if you carry it the whole time. One thing you also get introduced to is the first among many. And he is a tiny little baby here. But this is a reoccurring enemy that I believe is like some sort of like, this is where the inspiration from Resident Evil comes into play again. This guy is going to show up a bunch. He's a big, scary boss, and you got to get used to him because he is going to be... He's going to be a big boy, and he's going to be giving you a lot of troubles. So I think this opening scenario is really good. It's really tight, and it does a very good job at building a nice frame for a story to then further explore. All right, now we're looking at the second scenario, Night on the Town. So this is... Choose 2 at random. So this is what I was talking about here, about how we are now in ARKHAM. Oh, these other ones are set aside. But basically, I'm going to just put them all out right here. So basically, oh, look at these little broken... I think these might just be old clue tokens. But how this one works is that we are in ARKHAM, baby. We got Hibbs Roadhouse, we got Ma's Boarding House, the Orrin Library, the Yale Magic Shop, General Store, ARKHAM Advertiser, Bank of ARKHAM, and River Docks. So this one obviously gets a huge boon from me because I love a scenario that takes place in ARKHAM City proper. I just think that those are just really fun and they're very nostalgic for me and I really like them. And I love that we get to revisit this 4 times. And this is where the changing comes in because depending on how things go in this scenario, it'll determine how the rest of your map shapes up. Because essentially you have a limited number of time. This scenario is very Midnight Masks-esque. You have a limited amount of time to complete a number of objectives, and the better you do, obviously, the better that is. Likewise, there is an enemy that shows up, and he does not F around. And then you get another... It's like pretty much just exactly... It's pretty much just exactly Midnight Masks, which is really cool. It's a very good structure. Like, once again, one thing I like about, especially in these early scenarios, is that, like, it's learned... You can see that there's a lot of inspiration coming from the actual official scenarios for this campaign. So, you have a limited number of time to defend. To defend the location. So, when investigator location initiates a defend test, place X of your clues on your location, reduce the difficulty of that test by X. For some reason, I'm missing in my head. Where are these defend tests come in? Ah, yes. Yeah, okay, they're the allies. There we go. We can figure this out. So yeah, there's a bunch of allies set aside of people in Arkham that you need to get their assistance to help defend the city of Arkham. So we have Hib, and these are challenging tests that you cannot modify except for if they say, like Hib's is any skill 4 per player. You may commit cards and use abilities on player cards that boost your skill value on this check. So yeah, this is, you've heard that right. Your eyes do not deceive you. This is a 16 skill test. You can reduce it with clues, which is where this becomes a lot easier because assuming you can get all the clues to make that easier. But then as you can see, it kind of carries over into all of these things. Now, I've never played this with more than 2 players, and I don't know, I can't speak to how these scale up. But in theory, if you have more clues, it should still be very... You should be able to make up for the higher number by having more clues to do things and more people at locations to help you with things like Hibs and stuff like that. The other ones, though, are kind of like, they're a little bit spicy. So Doyle Jeffries is number of events in your discard pile, 1 + 2 per player. If you succeed, flip this card over and resolve its story text. So this is how you get the survivors. But these guys can also be flipped through the agenda, which then turns the place into a miasmatic Hibs Roadhouse. It becomes a miasma location, and that is not good. It is not good, and then it locks those locations into the negative side. So basically, if you defend a location, it becomes positive for the remainder of the campaign, and if you fail, it becomes negative for the remainder of the campaign, which is really cool. And also as well is that you can see that on these things, they kind of carry through, and I think there's a lot of inspired design that comes from this. So Doyle Jeffries, number of events in your discard pile, and this says after you play an event at this location, draw 1 card and gain 1 resource. Riverdocs cares about skills, Orin Library cares about hand size, and then likewise, like as you can see here, the Hibs Roadhouse Good cares about you succeeding by 2 or more, and on the inverse, it's a negative. So after you start your turn to this location, choose your highest skill value for the rest of this phase. Treat that skill as if you had a base skill of 1. And it kind of just really carries over very nicely through it. And it's what is my favorite part of this campaign, the fact that each is different. And like depending on what happens and what you save, what you defend, and what goes bad, can really change the pacing and structure. Because you're going to be living on this map for 4 scenarios, 3 scenarios after this one, it changes things because, say for my first time I played through, I had these 3 locations bad, which meant that the bottom side of my map, anytime I had to go down here, was really rough. My next time through, it was these 3, which made now my right side of my map really tough. So it's one of those things that I think is just really cool and offers a good amount of replayability to the scenario. I think I don't have much more to say about this second scenario, but I think it's a very good second scenario, and it's very fun, and I like what it does to set up the future of the campaign for you as a player. I'm excited to play again to see what happens and who I save and who I don't, and I think that is what makes it most engaging. To see the small things that can change from scenario to scenario. It's like the middle section of Dark Matter, how the order can change how it's paced. And likewise here, how you approach and succeed in this scenario, and also like what gets a flip by the random starting thing, also makes it really fun and really interesting. I will say, this location was very tough when it was flipped. Oh my god, I hated this one flipped. So like now I know I might want to prioritize saving the general store, which you need to do by number of assets you control. So Bryn would love this. But yeah, great second scenario and a great start to the campaign. All right, we are on to scenario 3, Dead by Dawn. In this one, you go into a mansion to speak to a certain special scientist who you may recognize. as Mr. Herbert West himself, the Reanimator. So this one has something that I personally have always not been a fan of, which is unkillable enemies. However, I will say though, my second time through this campaign, through this scenario, I understood it a little bit more and I did have a better time through. My blind playthrough with this one was very rough, but I do think that my second playthrough was a lot nicer and a lot smoother. And I think that that is just shows that it's more just about my own personal thing, because I know there's probably a lot of players out there who don't have a problem with unkillable enemies. So basically in this scenario, you are exploring this mansion and the enemies that show up primarily are these zombies that none of them can be killed. However, when they take damage, if they have damage excess of their health, that they remove a damage instead and do not ready. So basically you can like stun them and like kill them for the time being, but then they're going to reanimate and then stand up. Some cool things I like about this scenario. I think the flavor of this scenario is really cool and really creepy, and exploring the mansion is really fun. The goal of it is to get a certain number of resource tokens on a location. Basically, you're flipping switches, and you need to flip 3 switches to open the door to West's lab. When you do, you find Herbert West, and he's like, hello, get me out of here. Because he's back, baby, the first among many. That, I believe, is art from a Magic the Gathering card, if I'm not mistaken. But one thing I realized, actually, while setting up this video, is that in scenarios 2, 4, 6, and 8, you're in Arkham. In scenarios 1, 3, 5, and 7, the first among many shows up, which actually is really cool and really good pacing now that I actually see it in practice. And now that I actually think about it and realize it, I think that was an awesome choice by the designer to do that. And I love now knowing that, and I think it gives a good pacing to the entire campaign. I think the pacing of this campaign is really good, and there are no duds that exist in there because the pacing just changes from A to B the whole time, the kind of the 2 stories being told. One thing that I think is really cool about this, the designer had made this is like an inspired thing here, but you can earn allies that if you did not earn them from the store, you might earn them in other ways. But they come up with this tenuous allies card. So attached card does not take up any slots, gains forced when the game ends or this card would leave play. Remove this card and tenuous allies from the game. Really clever, really flavorful, and I think this is like some genius inspired design that I hope we see something like this in some of the official campaigns. I don't think I have much more to say about this one. It's a tough scenario your first time through, but it's really fun once you get a better handle on it and you have a bit more control. And I think it's a very differently paced scenario than what you're normally used to. And I think it's like, while it's definitely not my favorites in the campaign, I do think that this, after playing it a second time, I think that this is one of the best designs in the whole campaign. I think it works really well. The math is really good. The numbers are very good. And I think this is a winning scenario in this campaign. And I just think that it's really nice. Even though it's not one of my favorites, but that's just my own personal preference when it comes to enemies that don't die. But I do think that still it's just a really good scenario. Okay, scenario 4, Morning Chorus. So I think if I had to point to a specific scenario that's probably my favorite, it might be this one. It's either scenario 2, scenario 4, or scenario 6. I just think, you know what, there's also a case for this one. I know I've heard some of my users on my Discord channel, they weren't as hot on this one, but I really like Death at Sundown. We'll get to that, though. We have a bunch more scenarios before that in the process. But I think Morning Chorus is one of my favorites. The mood of it is really good, and I think it plays really nicely. This is another example of one of the scenarios where there are some rules that are a little bit hard to understand at first, your first time through. But then when you put it into practice for a few rounds, it becomes a lot easier and really good. So the flavor of this one is that there is this guy, the Priest of Plagues. And he is going to be leading a parade. A procession is the scary fancy word. Of enemies around ARKHAM. They're all root tuning. When a new enemy gets added, it goes into the the end of the line. And it will, if the enemies move, I believe they even disengage from you. Like, they're here to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to move around the procession. So this is where what I was talking about, how if certain things go bad, it can make it really tough on the scenario because you are sometimes forced to move through. This guy also cannot be damaged by player cards or effects. There is a way to defeat him as it goes, but basically he's going to keep root tooting his parade around, his like Santa Christmas parade, until like you defeat him or he defeats you. How this one works is it kind of goes into a similar thing the last time where you need to do positive things on locations. So where do those exist again? We'll find them eventually. Give me a second. Aha! Yes, very clever again. So after you resolve an ability on a stable location, place one resource on that location as a barricade. Then if there are three player or more resources on the location, remember that you've rallied that location. You can rally 2 different locations per game. So you now know you have a goal, and that goal is to place barricades and rally locations. So for example, after you succeed by 2 or more in a test at your location, heal 1 damage or 1 horror from a card you control. If you do that 6 times, or 3 times, 3 per player. 6 is, as I said, I played this all 2-player. You get to rally that location. The barricades are how you deal damage to this guy, because I believe... Yeah, so then this comes into play. And then anytime that this guy, until the game, each infected enemy gains force. After this enemy enters the location with any barricades, remove as many barricades as possible up to this guy's remaining health and then damage it. So that this guy's basically, he don't stop for no one. So if you put like a knife in front of him, he'll slowly walk into it. And that's how you kill him. Which does like this cool thing where you're kind of like trying to keep up with the thing, but also stay ahead with the procession. And I think it's just a really cool resonance of flavor. And then, like, once again, as I said, all of these cards kind of just... It's the same thing from the last one. After you play an event at this location, draw 1 card and gain 1 resource. And then also, as from the act, place a resource on this location as a barricade. This is where the punishments come in, because once again, once something becomes miasmatic, or filled with miasma, I'm not even sure if miasmatic is a word, but or if I'm even pronouncing it right if it is a word, but these are now in play and they're bad. In addition, the ones that go bad add a unique enemy to the deck, which are going to keep showing up until you kill them or the campaign ends. So you can see that here. And then they also add unique treachery cards to the deck, which is really cool because it, as I said, this is where the replayability comes in, because you are like the locations being different will change the enemies and even the construction of the Mythos deck, which is really cool and really fun. Likewise, the enemies all have things that are relevant to their location stuff. So Doyle Jeffries cares if someone plays an event at a connecting location or his location. Incredible. Just like really cool stuff here. Poor Hibbs. Whoa. He's just gutted. Oh my god. Yeah, but I think there's just a lot of really cool stuff happening with this scenario, and then also the constructions of the potential Mythos decks and enemies that can show up that I think makes this just a really cool scenario and a really cool end of the middle point of the campaign. All right, we're on Scenario 5, High Noon Descent. We are back in the lab. that we started the campaign in, which means it's the 5th scenario. It's an odd number. So that means you know who, the first among many, is coming back, but we'll get to him. In this scenario, you are in the lab, and you basically have, like, the best way of putting it is you have 3 mini dungeons that you need to go through. And they each have, like, a different kind of vibe and feeling to them. I'm going to start by saying right now that this is probably my least favorite scenario in the campaign. However, I can see that maybe some other people can find an enjoyment in it that I didn't. But just for my own personal thoughts on this one, this is probably the one that I dislike the most of the whole campaign. And that's just mostly because it feels a little bit strange to me. Like, it just feels like I'm playing like 3 mini scenarios as upon one full scenario. Not that I think there's anything like particularly bad about this scenario, because like all the pieces work and I think they all are designed to fit really well. But I don't know, it just didn't resonate with me that much. So as you see, it starts with this first mini dungeon that you need to go through. They're all connected only one way, but you can, for any action, you can just move back here. I think they're all, each sub-level connects is one way to directly below it, but there's a way that you can just move to the safe room. Yeah, investigators may move to the safe room as if it was connected to any sub-level location. So basically you can just like keep taking the elevator back to the safe room. So like the safe room does feel very safe because enemies cannot enter it, which I think is really cool. Like I think flavorfully this one works nicely. And exploring the dungeon down to get into West's office. And like to get through, you need to find certain things. Like you cannot move to a lower sub-level unless you found a dead man's access card, which you can do by... So it's like this one, when the last clue is discovered from this location, remember that you found a dead man's access card, which means you probably then want to go down this way. You cannot move down to this one unless you synthesize a dangerous acid. And you can like something like, it's like basically you're like trying to figure out the best way to this. Like this one allows you to do the acid, and it's just like this like weird little puzzle. It's not really a puzzle because it's just like you have to like go in the right order. And that's the first dungeon. The second dungeon I think is my favorite of the 3. In this one, it's kind of like split up something like, I'm not putting the right locations, but it's like split something like this. And you have to move 2 pieces of the crests. They move back in here, and when they meet together, they lock, chunk, and then the door opens. So it's like, this one's very video gamey. This feels like a Zelda dungeon for this scenario. The last one, there are a bunch of locations that you need to basically find the correct order. You can move to them as you get through, but basically you got to find the right location and then get yourself out. One thing that I think is really cool about, and I think these are some of like the biggest wins of the whole campaign, are that you can, that like if you do not, in the first scenario, the lab alpha is burning, and you can choose to either put it out or let it keep burning. And if you do, it'll determine what cards and enemies are potentially added to your Mythos deck when it comes to this scenario, which I think is just really cool design, and I think it's very inspiring even to me as a designer, because it's these small changes that I think are really cool and can really do a good job at making each campaign feel different. And then the agency enemies come back, and then as I said, there is the first among many returns again, and he is even bigger. Do you remember the first time he was just a 2/5 per player 2? Now he's a 5/5 per player 2. He's ginormous. Yeah, I think this scenario just doesn't resonate with me on like a crazy level, but I do still think that there's some good stuff in it. But yeah, hopefully you'll enjoy it when you play this one a lot more than I did. Maybe you like little mini dungeons. Maybe you like the mood and the feeling. Because I think there's a lot of cool stuff. It just didn't work personally for me. Alright, Scenario 6, the Afternoon War. We're back in Arkham. I'm not going to touch on it again, but likewise as before. As you can see, I'm just going to delete them so they're kind of just out of the way. But the cards that are bad are the places, the locations that went bad are still going to be bad. And then if the enemy's not defeated, the enemy also gets shuffled into the encounter deck. In this scenario, you are in ARKHAM as a war between the beings of Cthugha and the beings of Hastur are fighting. The big part about this one is that the big bad himself, this guy right here, Balshindor, I believe his name is. You know him, the blood of Balshindor. He is not good. And these guys, both Cthugha, from what I remember anyway, I could be completely wrong, but both Cthugha and Hastur are like, no bueno, we got to stop this guy. So there's a war raging, and low damage and horror are placed on locations, and they're not good. And the basically is that Hastur is dealing more horror, Cthugha is dealing more damage. You're going to have to, it follows a very similar structure where there is step one, find the gate. And then you can find either the gate of flame or the gate of the king. You then have to go in and close that gate. When you do, though, that half leaves the war. So you're closing the gate to Carcosa. The enemies from Carcosa are no longer in the war. You close the gate to Fomalhaut. All right, sure. All the guys from, I believe, Cthugha leave. So it's kind of like a really cool flavor thing, and it really resonates because then like it has this like story. You see it in a movie. They close one of the gates and they're like, thank God, we're done. And then you look out, but there's still the other half of the army still attacking ARKHAM, and you're like, okay, let's fucking get to work. And I think that's just really cool. So then basically you just do the same thing again. And while it might feel like it's just a little bit samey, the pressure that's given up by the Mythos deck and the fact that one half's gone, so now you're facing the other half, which means, sure, I'm not taking damage, but I'm taking a lot more horror, is really spicy. It's really spicy. And then when you close the other one, then it goes as well. There are big enemies for each side. Screeching Byakis, Lumbering Candlejacks, Fire Vampires, the Messenger of the King and the Messenger of Flame. So these guys show up. Oh, big old bosses for you to fight. I think just once again, you can even just see like the two halves of design here, right? 4-4-2, 2-4-4, 2 damage, 1 horror, 1 damage, 2 horror. Each other enemy gets +1 damage. Each other enemy gets +1 horror. When you place damage for this enemy on this agenda, place it on Unbinding location instead. So the Unbinding location is where the summonists start to happen. And I believe, if I remember correctly, that's also random. And it also then impacts this one. So it's all these like small decisions the designer made, which is really cool for the playthroughs on this one. I really like this scenario. Like I said, it's probably realistically my second, third, or fourth favorite, but it's in the top 4 for sure. I really like the feeling of this one. Really good vibe, and yeah, I just really like the Afternoon War. One more thing I should say before I delete all of this stuff here, but the locations that you defend, I believe it's, if I can remember, but yeah, I believe that the locations that you defended, you get these rallied characters. So like they're here to support you, and they give you a bonus, which allows you to remove tokens from play, which are bad because tokens on locations, especially the location of the Unbinding, at the end of the round, place 1 Doom on the current agenda for every 4 non-clue tokens on this location. So removing tokens is good. I do like that this also is a negative if you're playing a Prophesy Profana and you put a resource token on a location. That also then does this as a little bit negative, which I think is just kind of funny and kind of cute that it works out that way. Yeah, I believe this was already all designed by the time that the Profana was released, but it just makes me laugh. It just makes me laugh. Okay, Scenario 7, Death at Sundown. In this one, you venture into a tower at Independence Square, And the goal is to essentially put a certain somebody, Dr. Elias or Elias Pickman, the mind of the monster. So this is the first among many. And the first among many is ginormous. He's huge. He's beyond reason right now. And he exists down here, and he has this tendril that moves through the tower and chases you around. So this one I really like this scenario, but I think it's also because it works really well for my brain. In this scenario, it's essentially kind of like an episode of Tom and Jerry, or like a Roadrunner, where this guy is trying to get you, and you just need to position yourself in a way to avoid that. So like if this guy's here, you want to be at this location. Because like if this guy's here and you're here, you want to end your turn here, because then that means that he has to move either here or here from this location to get to you, because they're both 2 away, right? So it allows you to actually plan way ahead to figure out how you're going to beat this guy, which I think is just really cool and really fun. And my brain really clicks for that kind of design. So as I said, that's probably another reason why I like this scenario, because it works for how I like to looking at the map of the board, and I just think it's really fun. It's like a literal game of cat and mouse, and you just don't want to get caught. The goal of this one is to find assets that are very special. And then these assets, the killing words, the binding runes, and maybe and the rusted blade. These are the important ones. And if you get them all, they basically, this is the thing that I'm going to just say, as I said in the intro, that was very tough my first time through. You essentially fight this guy in the victory display. Because there is a location, I'm pretty sure it's a location, maybe I'm crazy. Am I just crazy? Huh. I'm pretty sure, I guess maybe I just missed it or accidentally deleted it or something like that. But there's a location that lives in the victory display. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it should be the heart location. And then you go and fight this guy in his own mind, and his mind is represented by the victory display. So this is one of the things that I was talking about, how this designer really likes to explore the what-ifs of design. So like there's nothing that's like even just trying to make sense of fighting something in the victory display is kind of like a what the heck's going on, right? Or like even having the victory display as an area that you can go into is also like a what, that doesn't make sense. And honestly, your first time through it is a little bit tricky. Like it is just a little bit like weird and hard to really fully understand. My second time through it was a lot easier, but this is like one of those things that I think is cool exploratory design, but also feels very custom campaign-y, right? This is kind of like what I mean when I talk about something like feels like a custom campaign. Because it's like, it's a what-if design that you probably likely would never see in an official version of the game. I think this scenario is really cool. It's really fun. I like the way that it makes you think. There are some cards that are really tough. It's you or me. Choose an investigator and move directly to the first among many's location. I know that this card is basically just take 1 and 1, right? But it also like eats up a lot of actions. I just think this card, like, it can really ruin your day. And I think that it's good to have cards that can ruin your day, but I'm not like, it still just felt like awful every time I drew it. And maybe ultimately, yeah, that's definitely okay that you can have cards that feel awful, but every time I drew this card, I was always like, oof. But I think I still won both times through, so I think it's still just fine. But just be aware of it. There might be cards that, like this, that can really just, you'll hate this card when you draw it. Yeah, it's a cool scenario, though, and you finally get to actually kill the tendrils of the first. and the first among many. And one thing, as you can see, is here, the first among many's location gains the miasma trait and is connected to the victory display for the purpose of the tendril of the first movement. So right away, it's going to be like, okay, I get it. He's in the victory display and he can move out of it. He can move back over here if we kill him, which is very true. However, then it gets really crazy near the end when you actually can enter the victory display as a location. So that's where it gets a little bit... It could have the potential to get a little bit wonky, especially if you're not like very well versed in the rules, or in the case of me, be lucky enough to have an audience who's watching live that is very well versed in the rules. Okay, the final scenario, the Midnight Hour. In this scenario, you are fighting Balshandor himself, and this one is really strange. So, in this location, there are some locations, the locations you rally are still going to be rallied. They're going to replace the other ones, which I think is really cool. But on the back of each location, let's just flip these, there's an enemy. So this is just another example of where I was talking about how this designer really liked to explore the ideas of the what if. What if this is how the game worked? And I think that's really cool, and I think that's really fun to play. But once again, to my point, that sometimes this can feel a little bit custom campaigny, right? But I think these are really cool. Like the idea of it is really cool, and it's very flavorful, and dare I say it, even kind of fun and engaging. And you basically have to close locations, and then when you defeat them, you can spend clues to place a horror token on that location, locking it up. Except for something that I need to talk about briefly, just so that you guys are aware. This is something that I personally, it's a big issue I have with the campaign, and probably like why that this scenario, while it's a really cool idea for a final scenario, I don't really have a lot of fun playing it. And that's just because of this Ire of the Unbound card, which is after you enter or start your turn at a location with a damage or horror on it, move one damage or horror from that location onto a card you control, and at the end of your turn, if you did not deal damage or gain clues, discard Ire of the Unbound. So what this does, that means that if you have placed some progress down on a location, this card, if you draw it, if you end your turn on a location with a horror, which is going to be the majority of the locations on the board, then you lose that progress. And admittedly, yes, there are a lot of ways that you can play around this. Mitigation through things like water protection and stuff like that. Test of wills. Don't be on locations with these. Only end your turn on locations that are rallied, right? However, this is still just, to me, kind of like design, in my mind, especially in a game like Arkham Horror, should hinder. It should never remove progress. Progress is something that your players should scratch, claw, and climb up the mountain to get. And instead of kicking them down that mountain, we should be like, now there's a locked door at the top of the mountain. How do you get in, right? That's just more compelling design to me, both as a player and as a designer. So this is just something that I can't not talk about when it comes to this. Like, so the scenario is really cool, but I do think that there is, for me, in this scenario, the Ire of the Unbound is just a card that if you see it, and there's 3 copies of it, if you don't see it, or if you do see it and it's fine, it's a complete different thing than if you just lose all the progress and now you need to spend a bunch of clues again. So that's enough about Ire of the Unbound. The way the locations work is that if you damage them, you discover clues, I believe, and if you discover clues, you damage them. So there's like a really good balance there. It allows all people to feel like that they are doing something, which is, I think, really good. Because a lot of the times when you get like a scenario where you have to fight a boss, half of the group is getting clues, half of them are fighting the boss. This one, it really feels like the group gets to work together, and I think that's a huge victory for the flavor of this scenario. That the clue getter gets to help deal damage, and the fighter gets to help gain clues, all while doing the same thing. You could be at the same location doing the exact same thing, and you feel like you're cooperating with one another. So it allows for a lot of moments of really epic teamwork that I think is ultimately a huge success for this scenario. One of my favorite things too is that you can also evade a location, which I just love that there was a comment on my playthrough of this where someone just asked, how do you evade a location? And to that I gotta say, how can you? But I think this designer found a way to make it work, which I think is just a huge accomplishment into the what-if exploration design that this scenario brings. The scenario has a big finish. Oh, I guess I forgot about these guys. These guys show up again, but they're allies this time, which is really cool. Once again, I think that there's a lot of great forward thinking in the design of this scenario, of this whole campaign, where the small things you do add up and lead into this finish where all of it comes into play, because it's just everything, every small little thing seems to matter in this campaign, which I think is a huge success. It ends with you having to fight literal Bal Shandor himself, and you do that by like being in him like this. And then after you start, and then you're gonna fight them. It's just a neat little finish, and I think like while this Ire of the Unbound to me is rather unfortunate, I think that there's a lot of cool things going in this scenario, and if you're playing with A+ or S rank investigators and your decks are really good, as one of the people in my Discord said, these things might not ever even be a problem. Like if they flip, you have the positive tempo to flip it back. However, it really punishes if your decks are weaker or slower, or alternatively, if you're not as good as the game. However, I also just think this, as I said, like for my design philosophy, I disagree with a card like this. But I think that it is a good finish to the campaign, and I think Call of the Plaguebearer is really fun and really good. There are a few surprises that I have chosen not to mention in here, and they revolve around this book. So I hope that you guys find some things as you play it. Yeah. That is Call of the Plaguebearer. I highly suggest you check it out. I think it is definitely worth your time. It's easily in my top 3 of my custom campaigns that I have played on this channel and that I've played throughout all of the ARKHAM that I've been recording for a very long time. As I said, I do want to do more of these in the future, but I do want to do 2 playthroughs of a campaign before I even start considering it. But yeah, let me know what you think of Call of the Plaguebearer in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. A huge shout out to our patrons for supporting the channel. I'll be back for more ARKHAM before you know it. You can't get rid of me. I'm always here. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good one. And as always, GG's.